Hey everybody, it's Dr. Fox. Let's talk about principal lymph nodes and pathways, part 2. In this video, we'll describe the general pattern of the flow of lymph from the capillaries to the ducts, noting regions served and vessels followed, with special emphasis on the abdominal viscera, the abdominal wall and pelvis, as well as the lower limbs. So again, we're focusing today on the abdominal wall and pelvis, as well as the viscera within the abdominal pelvic cavity and the lower limbs. Let's start with the abdominal cavity. And let's work our way backwards. So as we've discussed in part 1, inferior to the diaphragm, the proximal dilation of the thoracic duct, or the cisterna chyli, is the space into which all of the lymph from the lower limbs, pelvis, abdomen, and the contents of the abdominal pelvic cavity flows. So that's where it's all going. The two major conduits that get us there are the lumbar trunks and the lateral or para-aortic lymph nodes, left and right. So coming up either side of the abdominal aorta and on either side of the anterior aspect of the spine are the lumbar trunks, and we have these lateral aortic or para-aortic clusters of lymph nodes. There are several visceral inputs to those trunks and then pelvic inputs. So let's start with the visceral inputs first. These are going to read exactly like the major branches of the abdominal aorta because they follow those branches of the abdominal aorta. Keeping in mind that this follows the pattern of if the lymphatics are deep, they're following arteries. So because these trunks and nodes are on the abdominal aorta, we should expect that all of these branches will have tributaries. So let's start with the first major branch of the abdominal aorta, the celiac trunk. There are celiac nodes which are going to feed into those lateral aortic nodes. Then we have the renal arteries, and there are renal nodes. These are paired, left and right. Then we have the superior mesenteric artery, and going along with that are the SMA nodes. Then we have the inferior mesenteric artery, and along with that are the IMA nodes. So, celiac trunk, SMA, IMA, all of the major anterior branches, as well as the renal arteries, which are major lateral branches, all with their own sets of nodes named for the arteries, all feeding into those lateral or para-aortic nodes in the lumbar trunks. Then we have, working up from below, the pelvic lymphatic tributaries. Now, if you remember the pattern of bifurcation from the abdominal aorta and beyond, this becomes really easy. So let's review very quickly. The abdominal aorta is going to bifurcate around L4 into two common iliac arteries, left and right. Each of those common iliac arteries at the pelvic brim will bifurcate into an internal iliac artery, which serves the pelvic viscera and perineum, and external iliac artery, which serves the lower limb. And so what we have here are internal iliac nodes and external iliac nodes following those arteries, feeding into common iliac nodes, left and right, which then feed into the lateral aortic nodes and lumbar trunks on the way up to ultimately the cisterna chyli. Visceral, as well as pelvic and lower limb lymph, all flowing up to and through the cisterna chyli. Now let's go superficial. So if deep lymph follows arteries. Superficial lymph follows veins. Let's start with the transumbilical plane. So the transumbilical plane is this imaginary line at the level of the umbilicus. And let's harken back to a group of nodes that we talked about in part 1, which were the axillary nodes. And then let's also talk about some of the nodes that we just discussed on the previous slide, those external iliac nodes. Well, superficial to those external iliac nodes are those superficial inguinal lymph nodes. So we've got 2 clusters of nodes here. All of the wall above the transumbilical plane is going to filter up to the axillary nodes. All of the wall below the transumbilical plane and from the superficial lower limb is going to filter up to the superficial inguinal nodes. So it's one way or the other, and it's all defined by that transumbilical plane, above to the axillary, below to the superficial inguinal. So from those superficial inguinal nodes, we go to the deep inguinal nodes. So that's deep within the femoral triangle. And the deep inguinal nodes are going to ascend up to the external iliac nodes. And those external iliac nodes, as you recall, go to the common iliac nodes. All right, so far so good. Now let's look at the lower limbs. And again, we're just going to keep the basic relationship of deep lymph follows arteries, superficial lymph follows veins. So it's right here. So we've got deeper lymphatics following the arteries, which are deep, and superficial lymphatics following the superficial veins. Now, if you recall, the superficial veins are the saphenous veins. So you've got a great saphenous vein moving from the medial malleolus, ascending along the medial aspect of the thigh up to the femoral triangle. You have a lesser saphenous vein, or the small saphenous vein, which goes from the lateral malleolus and feeds into the popliteal fossa. So let's think about that for a second. So most of that superficial lymph is going through the great saphenous up to the femoral triangle to those superficial inguinal nodes. The superficial inguinal nodes feed into the deep inguinal nodes, the deep into the external iliac nodes. Now, the superficial lymph from the lesser or small saphenous is going to enter into the popliteal fossa and follow the lymph that's tracing along the deep arteries. So that would be the popliteal artery, and then the femoral artery, and then the external iliac artery on its way up. So let's assess the knowledge that we've discussed. Superficial infections of the lower abdomen, so that would be below or inferior to the umbilicus, and lower limb tend to be picked up by which group of lymph nodes? Is it A, axillary? Nope, that would be the lymph from superior to the transumbilical plane. Lateral aortic? No, that's going to pick up the deep lymph. Hilar? Nope, that is another name for those bronchopulmonary nodes in the thoracic cavity at the hyla of the lungs. Para-aortic? Nope, that's the same name as the lateral aortic, same nodes. The correct answer is the superficial inguinal nodes. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to talking to you in the next playlist. Take care, all.